Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be taking a look at the Happymodel Mobula7 HD. This is another breed of tiny whoops that they are labelling Cine whoops, and that is because we have got a camera up the front that can record in 1080p 60 FPS HD while at the same time sending its FPV feed through to the VTX, so we only need one camera up the front. And when I started my YouTube channel, it was my dream to have something like this. Now at that time I had a Hubsan H107D, and that was a model that was a little bit bigger than this, and it also had brushed motors because brushless motors weren't this small. And I would rip it apart, I would change the frame out to make it lighter, I'd use the flight controller, and then I would get an 808 camera and decase it and then try and make it fly. And the 808 camera first of all was 720p, and because they were brushed motors and it was quite heavy, it would fly for about 30 seconds and the footage was horrible. So I have to remind myself how far we have come since that time, and it's pretty incredible what we've got here. Now I'm lucky enough to have been sent this guy quite ahead of time. In fact, I think it's going to go on sale the 25th of February, and it's actually going to be a little bit different than what I've got here, but they are minor changes which I will explain throughout the video. And I guess you could say its competition is the full speed tiny leader. So let's take a look at the specifications. So the weight, first of all, is 46 grams. So if we compare that to the tiny leader, this one is 55 grams, so it's actually lighter. The motors are Happymodel branded, and they are a 1102 10,000 kV motor. We've got a naked bottom, and we've got really small details there. They have got a nice top pattern to them, and then we have got the propellers which are running props out. The frame is identical to the Eachine trash can, and I talked to Happymodel, and Eachine and Happymodel have done some kind of deal where they have shared the frame. So as you can see, we have got these clips here at the back for the LED board, but we don't have an LED board on this model. So I'll warn you now, this video is going to be fairly long because I'm going to try and cover as much as possible. And I think the first time I ran into Happymodel was fairly recently with the Mobula7, and I didn't get it at first. And for me, tiny whoops were for the winter when it's cold outside and you can fly inside your house. And the fact that you could add a 2S battery and have loads of power didn't make sense for indoors. Of course, you can bridge one of these connectors here and fly it on a 1S, but the other thing that I didn't really get was the size. So they are 75mm, and my favourite tiny whoop still for indoors is the UK/US 65, because it is 65mm across, which is the original size of the tiny whoop. But I think I'm just spoilt by that. Since I've come to love this thing and I have found a use for it, you know, I've joined a sports hall and it's fantastic in there. So let's get back to the specifications. So we have got the Crazy Bee F4 flight controller this time, so it's an upgrade because this one has got the F3. It's come with Betaflight version 4 flashed to it, and there are different targets depending on which receiver version you bought, because it has got an SPI based receiver, so you can have FlySky, DSMX, and also you can have it without a receiver because there's a spare UART as well, so you can even do crossfire if you can manage to fit the antenna on there somehow. I think this is a more updated version of the flight controller as well, because the colour of the buttons are different. So we've got the bind button there and it's white, and we've got the bootloader button there as well. And because the receiver is SPI based, you don't have to mess around plugging the battery in whilst holding down the button. You can just plug the USB in and then hold the bind button down for a couple of seconds, and you can bind it in D16 mode for the FCC version of the FrSky firmware, and you'll get the full telemetry with that. Or you can bind it with the EU LBT, but you will do that with the D8 mode, and you won't get the telemetry with that, but you do still get the RSSI feeding through. So the motors connect via these JST connectors, and the wires are silicon. The ESCs are 5 amp each, so that's 20 amp in total. Then the VTX is actually separate from the flight controller, and it's a switching VTX via TBS Smart Audio. So it switches up to 200 milliwatt, and it has got a linear antenna that comes out of the back, and it's got a nice clip that keeps it in place as well. And we also have got an LED on the top here, which will tell you what the battery status is. It's quite strange actually. I'll plug the battery in to show you. So we've got this light here, and can you see it is breathing, as they call it, green, and that means that the battery voltage is above 3.3 volts, and when it's below 3.3 volts it's just gone. There actually it will flash red, so that's only really useful line of sight, I think. So bit of a strange one there, and no LED board in general that you can program. So above the flight controller we've got the Cadex Turtle V2, and unlike the tiny leader, we can access the stop and start record button. Now this came with the auto recording switched off, which is fine because I can access the button, but what they have done is they have removed the connector for the controller board. Now I can't plug this in and change the camera settings, but the final version is gonna have the adapter soldered directly to it. It's so that they can fit it in, because the connector is quite big on the Turtle, and I don't think it would fit in this stack if they hadn't removed it. So yeah, I can't change the camera settings, but I can solder it up, so perhaps I will do that a little bit later. And we've got the microphone coming out of the back there as well. Then on the other side we've got the micro SD card slot. It is spring loaded, so in a heavy crash I guess it could eject your micro SD card. That's a downside to the Turtle against the Runcam Split Mini. Then we've got the XT30 at the back, and then at the front I'm happy to say that the camera can have a high angle, but it can also sit pretty flat as well, so I think that is going to be good for indoors. What I actually ended up doing with the tiny leader is, because they used TPU, I used a pair of cutters and I cut away some of the TPU, because I found that the angle that it was pretty much fixed at was just too extreme for indoors, so I cut it away and that now goes about as flat. As for the Betaflight setup, in my opinion, it needed quite a bit of work. It didn't have dynamic filters turned on, it didn't have anti-gravity or air mode turned on, and then in the modes tab it didn't have much selected in there either. There's no beeper on here, so you can use D-Shot commands, but that wasn't set up, and I did like the placement of the on-screen display, I will say so. I left everything there. They have got their own PIDs and their own rates in there. I did change the rates, but I left their PIDs to see how it flies with those. And one thing that I have kept the same is the digital idle, actually, and that is because when I reviewed the trash can, I put the digital idle up to 6%, and it took ages to come back down from a throttle punch, and I think that is to do with the frame. I think these struts here create some drag, so I have kept it to 4%. One thing that is going to change is the length of the canopy, and that is because the camera sticks out the front slightly, so they have advised me that the finished version is going to be elongated just to give the camera a little bit more protection. So let's see what else you get in the package. It's pretty much the same extras that you got in the trash can. So we've got a screwdriver, we've got a spare set of propellers, we've got 2 bits of foam, and that is for sticking in this battery bay here in case your battery is fitting loose, and we've got a prop remover and some spare screws, which is always handy. Now they are going to be providing a battery with this copter, and it's a 3-cell battery, not a 2-cell battery, which I thought was interesting. Now, this one hasn't got any markings on it, but when it is released, it's going to have the Happymodel logo on it. They have sent me a 2S battery because they say that 3S is going to be too much for indoors. However, when I look at the calculations, I actually don't think there's going to be too much difference between 3S and 2S. So the 3S battery that they are going to ship with this guy, including the weight of the copter, is going to weigh 70.9 grams. And with this one, it weighs 65 grams. Now, this isn't going to be included in the package, but you can already buy it from Banggood. Now, there's no real markings on this, but if you look on Banggood's website, it says that it's a 300 milliamp high volt, so you can see it says that there, but it also says that it is a 30 to 80C battery, whereas this one is a 80 to 160C battery. Now in reality it's probably not going to meet 160C, and this one only going up to 80C. It's a 3S, so technically the more number of cells that you add, the less current draw there is, because we are going up in volts, so we get more power but draw less current. Same argument going for 6S with these race copters. But if we do some calculations, then 30C times by 300 milliamp is just 9 amps, and then 80C is 18 amps when it's times by 300 milliamp. So we've got 5 amp ESCs each here, so that's 20 amp. So we should be well within the tolerance with this battery. However, if we look at this battery, 80 to 160C, this battery here, if we say 80C for example times by 300 is 24 amps, and then 160C times by 300 milliamp is 48 amps. So this has got a current meter on board, so it'd be interesting to see what the difference in current draw is, the difference in flight time, and also the difference in power, because looking at these figures, I actually don't think that the 3S battery is going to be much of a benefit, but we will check that out during the flight. Okay, let's do a line of sight with this guy. As you can see, it's getting blown around by the wind. It's a windy day. This is the 2S battery that they have supplied, and really what I want to see is if there is a noticeable difference in punch between the 2S and the 3S. So let's go for a punch. The punch isn't bad, but just like the trash can, it sort of floats back down, which is interesting. Let's try again. The punch isn't bad at all. Came down faster that time. Yeah, it's strange that. I think it's got something to do with the ducts. So let's see if we can acro with it. Seems fine line of sight, but that's usually always the case. See if I can see that green light on the back that breathes, as they call it, and when it goes red, that's when it is below 3.3 volts. So really only useful line of sight. Strange feature. But anyways, let's go for one last punch, and then I'll compare it to the 3S battery and see if I can notice a difference. Okay, so this is with the 3S battery. Let's go for a punch this time. Look how long it takes for that to come back down. Now, it sounded like it had got more punch, but it didn't really look like it had got more punch. Maybe just a tad. Just a tiny bit more. But really, it's negligible, I would say. So why is that? Why does it sound like it's got more punch, but actually it appears to have about the same? Well, it's heavier, isn't it? So the motors are working harder, but we are getting similar results. So we'll have to see what the difference is FPV wise. Let's quickly see if it behaves any differently with acro. Everything seems fine, but again, FPV will be the test. So let's bring it in for a landing. So while I'm here, I thought it'd be interesting to see what the tiny leader HD is like whilst I've just flown the Mobula7 HD. So let's go for a punch. And it's definitely less, but that's hardly surprising. That was full throttle to recover there. This guy is 10 grams heavier than the Mobula7. But, you know, I really like it. I flew it in the indoor sports hall and it brought back great footage from that. And apparently this guy will also run on 3S. So let's give that a try. So as you can see, this Happymodel 3S battery fits the tiny leader as well. So let's give this a try and see how it performs. But again, I think it's not going to have as much punch because it's 10 grams heavier. But it might make it a little bit more lively for flying outdoors. Yeah, just as I expected. Not quite as much power, but not bad either. It is really getting pushed by the wind. But I'm not hearing any oscillations with the change in battery for both of these models. So that's pretty cool. Anyways, it's pretty cool in general. I think it's -4, so let's come in for a landing. So first of all, let's take a look at some DVR footage on 2S. The first thing that I noticed is that the voltage scaling was out just by a couple of points, so that's easy to adjust in Betaflight. The current meter, however, seemed to be pretty bang on, so I was impressed with that. I'm also impressed with the fact that we don't have any noise on the video. So let's take a look at the current meter when I go up on full throttle. So 13 amps recorded there. That is the highest number of amps that it recorded on 2S. So we've got the 20 amp ESCs. We're not gonna have a problem there. Now I'm trying to trick it out here, and as you can see, I did my cartwheel maneuver and it did that snappy maneuver on its own. And you have to remember, I am trying to trick this thing out. I'm not trying to hide anything, and if you fly these things in a particular way, then you can stop that from happening. But I'm just flying this guy like I'd fly my 5-inch. But to stop those snappy maneuvers from happening on their own, you have to give more throttle and more recovery, and make sure that you don't do really big dives, because that causes it as well. So big dive here, and as you can see, it's doing its snappy maneuvers there. But one thing that I thought was interesting on the 2S is the voltage sag. So the voltage never sagged below 6 volts, which is good. In fact, it rarely dropped below 6.5, which is the point really that you want to be landing at. So we'll have to see what the voltage sag is like on 3S. But yeah, it flies a little bit like the trash can, which should be no surprise really, because it's the same frame. And here I'm just doing a fall, because yeah, that seems to be a characteristic of this frame, is that it drops really slowly, and I think it's the drag of the struts. But yeah, in general, there's no jello on the picture, and this is at around about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun is out. So we've got snow on the ground as well. That usually increases the exposure. We have got a 3-minute flight time, and you can see there 300 milliamp on the current meter, so that is fairly accurate. But let's see what a 3-cell battery does. So the voltage scaling is out again when you go up to a 3S, and honestly I couldn't notice much of a difference. And I think 18 amp was the max number of amps that was drawn, but as you can see, it's still doing its pitchy thing when I put it into high maintenance maneuvers. But if you fly it properly, then it's not gonna do that. Just be smooth on the sticks, and I think indoors it's gonna fly really nice. Now, something that I did find interesting is that this battery sagged a lot more than the 2S battery. Another thing you'll notice as well is that the audio is really quiet. I don't know if that is a setting that they have changed, but compared to the tiny leader, the audio is really quiet in comparison. So yeah, the voltage behaving at the moment, but when I go up on the throttle in a minute, it drops to like 9 volts, I think, which is way below the point at which you should be landing. So what I think they should have done with this guy, if they did want to go 3S, is I think they should have gone down in capacity, just like they do with 6S, because we're getting more voltage sag and we seem to be getting diminishing returns. We're getting similar results in power, but we are getting way more voltage sag and it's not really benefiting. So maybe they should have gone a 3S, but maybe with a 250 milliamp battery, if that even exists, and then perhaps we could have got more power out of it. But I'm not seeing more power really. I'm seeing lots of voltage sag, and these Cadex turtle cameras, they don't like to go low on the voltage, and sometimes the video cuts out, so I was worried about that. So yeah, the 3S battery, a little bit wasted, I think, on this guy. I think also they could have gone up on the C rating, and that might have helped with the voltage sag, and we may have got more power out of it, but it's listed on Banggood as ATC, so I don't see that changing, but I'll be feeding that back. And a shorter flight time as well, 2 minutes 49. So I think all of this is going to raise a lot of questions if you are in the market for this kind of model. Now we are looking at the tiny leader here, and one of the issues I brought up with the tiny leader is that it had Giallo on the picture. Now I've been flying these things all day, and it's actually around about 3:30 and it's going dark now. So that means that the exposure value is lower, and therefore we're not going to get any Giallo. Same as you don't get Giallo indoors when I flew this in the indoor sports hall. Now I think for flying outside, the tiny leader is best. You can still trick it out, but it doesn't do as many of those snappy maneuvers as the Mobula7 HD. However, I did take issue with quite a few things with the tiny leader. The first one being the fact that they didn't provide the Cadex controller, and they left the on-screen display on there, so you couldn't change it unless you already had one of the controllers. It was really difficult to get to the record button. In fact, when I fly with it, I carry a little screwdriver to stop it. Of course you can set it to auto record, and both of these models, when you disconnect the battery, if they are recording, it will still save the footage, so I guess you don't need to worry about that. But I think my conclusion is going to be, for flying outside, get something like the GepRC Cygnet, because that one was fantastic. It doesn't have ducts, so it doesn't have these pitching back movements, and keep the tiny whoops inside, whether it's in a sports hall, which is where I'm going to be flying these things, where I can have a little bit more room and go a little bit faster, or whether it's in your house and you just take it a little bit more easy. We've got a sub 3 minute flight time with this guy, but I think that's because it's a little bit heavier. So it's a new dawn and a new day, and overnight I went to do some research on these yaw washouts, and there is a GitHub website that is dedicated to try and fix this problem, albeit for the Beta FPV line of products. So just search GitHub and yaw washout and it will give you those settings. Now I did try those settings on this model and it didn't make a difference on 2S. It did make a difference on 3S however, but it caused huge oscillations through the motors, so P-term oscillations and D-term oscillations, and I didn't feel comfortable flying like that because I think it would do damage to the motors. So what we are looking at here is a tune that I copied directly from the Tiny Leader HD, so sorry full speed, and it actually flew very similar to the Tiny Leader HD. Now it's also a sunny day, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to see if we got any jello. There is a tiny bit, I think, but I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as the Tiny Leader HD, so that might be a deal breaker for you when choosing between these two models. But I have spoken to Happymodel about these yaw washouts that I was getting, and they are aware of them. As I say, this is an early version that they have sent to me, and they are going to do some work themselves to try and reduce it. So hopefully when the customer gets theirs, then it won't be a problem, but I can only show what I have received here. But as you can see with the Tiny Leader HD tune, it's not that bad and it's flying pretty smooth. It's really cold though, so I still think this guy is going to be better for indoors. So speaking of flying indoors, let's see how the Mobula7 HD manages to fly around a moderately sized house. And I just want to thank Happymodel for sending me an early version of this product, and I'm sure when it's released to the customers there will be further improvements, and also when it's released to customers they will find ways of reducing these snappy maneuvers that it is doing. And as I mentioned, if you just fly it smoothly and don't do anything silly like I was doing, like inverted yaw spins and 5-inch freestyle maneuvers, then you'll get a good experience out of it, I think. Anyways, I'm going to leave you with some flying, and if you found this video useful, then I will link to my Patreon in the below. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.
Through the highways till my shadow turns to sun rays, and on we'll go. Through the wastelands, through the highways, and on see the horizon turn